The first sound wasn't the bulldozer. It was the chain. Snapping. Right outside my cabin. A chain that had hung across that gate for nearly 20 years. A gate my father built by hand. A gate that marked the entrance to the only road leading through that section of the mountain. I stepped onto the porch just after sunrise. Coffee still in my hand. And that's when I saw it. 2 excavators. A dump truck. 3 contractors. And a group of men standing where my gate used to be. The steel posts were already on the ground. The lock had been cut. The entrance was gone. For a second, I honestly thought they had the wrong property. Then I saw the survey flags. Fresh orange markers. Running straight across my land. Someone hadn't made a mistake. Someone thought they owned it. I walked back inside. Opened the gun safe. And grabbed my shotgun. Not because I planned to use it. But because when strangers start tearing apart private property deep in the mountains, you don't walk out there empty-handed. What happened next exposed a land deal worth nearly $20 million. An HOA board president who thought nobody would challenge him. A resort project that depended on one thing. One road. One mountain pass. One piece of land. My land. And the worst part? The man ordering my gate demolished had absolutely no idea who actually owned it. The foreman saw me first. His eyes dropped straight to the shotgun. Then back to my face. The machine stopped moving. Just for a second. Long enough for the mountain to go quiet again. I stayed on my side of the property line. Didn't raise my voice. Didn't make threats. I simply asked one question. Who authorized this? The foreman looked uncomfortable. Not scared. Just confused. Like he suddenly realized something wasn't adding up. He pointed toward a black pickup parked near the road. Standing beside it was a man I recognized immediately. Not a neighbor. Not a contractor. An HOA board president from a luxury development nearly 7 miles down the mountain. His name was Richard. Most people around the county knew who he was. He was involved in land deals. Construction projects. Development approvals. The kind of person who always seemed connected to someone important. Richard walked over. Completely calm. Completely confident. Like he expected me to apologize for interrupting. He told me the road was being upgraded. He said permits had already been approved. He said construction would continue. Then he said something strange. He called my gate an obstruction. An obstruction. I stared at the twisted steel lying in the dirt. That gate had been standing there since before his development even existed. Before most of those houses were built. Before the HOA had ever been formed. I asked him if he had proof. He smiled. Then handed me a folded document. At first glance it looked official. Survey maps. Property descriptions. County stamps. Everything appeared legitimate. But something felt wrong. Very wrong. One of the parcel numbers caught my attention. I knew that number. I had seen it countless times over the years. It wasn't mine. It belonged to federal land almost 2 miles away. Richard didn't notice my reaction. He kept talking. kept explaining, kept acting like the matter was settled. Meanwhile, the foreman stood silently beside him, watching, listening, waiting. I folded the papers, handed them back, and asked another question. Did anyone contact the actual property owner before tearing down the gate? For the first time, Richard's expression changed. Just slightly. Not enough for most people to notice. But I did. A brief pause. A quick blink. A tiny crack in the confidence. Then he answered. He said they had spoken with the owners months ago. Owners. Plural. That immediately raised another red flag. Because there was only one owner. Me. The cabin sat on nearly 600 acres of mountain property. My family had owned it for decades. There were no partners. No investors. No management companies. Just me. The contractors exchanged looks. Nobody said a word. But I could see it. Questions were starting to form. The kind nobody wanted to ask in front of their client. I told Richard he needed to stop work immediately. His answer came fast. No. Just one word. No. Then he turned and signaled the equipment operators. The excavators started again. Engines growling. Tracks moving. Dirt shifting. As if the conversation had never happened. I pulled out my phone. Started recording. That got everyone's attention. The foreman approached me quietly. Away from the others. His voice dropped low. He asked if I really owned the property. I told him yes. Every acre. His face tightened. Then he asked something even more interesting. Did I own the pass too? I looked at him. The pass? He nodded. The mountain pass. The only vehicle route connecting the development site to the state highway. My stomach sank. Because suddenly pieces started falling into place. This wasn't about road improvements. This wasn't about access maintenance. This was something much bigger. The foreman realized he had said too much. He immediately backed away. Returned to the work crew. Refused to answer any more questions. But the damage was done. Now I knew there was another project involved. One nobody had mentioned. I called the county planning office. The employee who answered knew exactly what I was talking about. That surprised me. Apparently several residents had already called that morning. Complaints. Concerns. Questions about heavy equipment operating near the pass. The employee couldn't discuss details. But he did say something important. There was a pending application tied to a major resort proposal. A very expensive proposal. And access was currently under review. Access. The same word the foreman had used. I thanked him. Hung up. And looked back toward the construction crew. By then they had moved beyond the gate. They were widening sections of the old road. Removing trees. Marking boundaries. Working fast. Almost too fast. Like they were racing a deadline. Around noon another truck arrived. Then another. Then another. More contractors. More surveyors. More equipment. The operation was growing by the hour. A nearby property owner named Michael drove up on an ATV. He had lived on the mountain longer than anyone. If something happened up there, Michael usually knew about it first. The moment he saw the destroyed gate, he stopped. Got off the ATV. And just stared. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he asked who approved this. I pointed toward Richard. Michael's face darkened immediately. Apparently Richard had been meeting with land investors for months. Holding private presentations. Showing maps. Promising future development. Promising increased property values. Promising jobs. Tourism. Growth. But according to Michael, there was one thing Richard never discussed. Ownership of the pass. Not once. That detail seemed oddly absent from every presentation. And now I understood why. Because ownership of the pass changed everything. Without legal access, no resort. Without legal access, no development financing. Without legal access, no project. Simple. Michael looked nervous. More nervous than I had ever seen him. Then he told me something else. 2 weeks earlier, survey crews had visited neighboring properties. They were asking questions. Taking measurements. Checking easements. Several landowners refused access. One surveyor reportedly admitted there were unresolved title questions. Unresolved title questions. That phrase stuck in my head. Because if title questions existed 2 weeks ago, why were bulldozers already tearing through private land? Nothing about this made sense. As the afternoon wore on, more neighbors arrived. Word spread quickly. People parked along the road. Watching. Whispering. Pointing. Trying to understand what was happening. Some recognized Richard. Others recognized the contractors. Nobody recognized the paperwork. That became the problem. The documents looked official. But every person who examined them found inconsistencies. Missing signatures. Incorrect parcel references. Descriptions that didn't match local maps. Tiny details. But enough to create doubt. Then came the first real twist. A deputy sheriff arrived. Not because anyone reported violence. Because someone reported unauthorized construction. The deputy walked the site. Spoke with me. Spoke with Richard. Spoke with the contractors. For nearly an hour. Nobody knew what conclusion he would reach. Then he asked Richard for proof of ownership. Not permits. Not project plans. Ownership. Richard handed over a thick folder. The deputy reviewed it carefully. Page by page. Minute after minute. The crowd grew larger. Nobody spoke. Everyone watched. Finally the deputy lowered the folder. His expression revealed nothing. But his next question changed the atmosphere completely. He asked Richard why several of the attached maps referenced parcels that weren't part of the application. The silence that followed felt heavy. Very heavy. Richard didn't answer immediately. For the first time all day, he seemed unsure. The deputy repeated the question. Still no answer. The contractors stopped working again. Equipment engines shut down. One by one. Until the mountain became quiet. The foreman looked worried now. Genuinely worried. Then the deputy stepped away and made a phone call. A long one. Long enough that people started speculating. Long enough that Richard began pacing. Long enough that I noticed something parked near the far edge of the property. A white SUV. County markings on the door. And inside sat two men. Watching everything. Taking notes. Neither had approached the site. Neither had spoken to anyone. They had simply arrived. And waited. When the deputy finally ended his call, he walked straight toward me. His face was serious. Very serious. Then he said 6 words that changed the entire situation. There's something you need to see. And it wasn't at the construction site. The deputy led me toward the white SUV. The 2 county officials stepped out before we reached it. Neither introduced themselves right away. They looked past me. Past the crowd. Straight toward the construction site. One of them held a thick binder. The other carried a tablet. Neither looked pleased. The older man finally spoke. He asked how long the contractors had been on the property. I told him everything started that morning. His jaw tightened. Then he exchanged a glance with the other official. The kind of glance that says a lot without saying anything. Back at the road, Richard was still standing near the equipment. Trying to appear calm. Trying to act like nothing had changed. But people were starting to notice. The confidence from earlier was fading. The county officials asked me a few more questions. Then they opened the binder. Inside were maps. A lot of maps. Old surveys. New surveys. Property records. Access agreements. Easement documents. Pages and pages of paperwork. One page immediately caught my eye. The mountain pass. There it was. Highlighted in yellow. Running across my property. Exactly where it had always been. The official tapped the page. Then asked if I had ever sold access rights. I told him no. Never. Not once. He nodded slowly. As if that answer confirmed something. Then he closed the binder. What he said next sent a chill through me. Several documents submitted during the resort application process appeared to conflict with county records. Appeared to conflict. That was careful wording. Very careful. Not an accusation. Not yet. But serious enough to get my attention. And serious enough to bring county officials onto the mountain in person. Meanwhile, the crowd near the gate continued growing. Neighbors were arriving from every direction. Word had spread fast. By now nearly everyone understood something wasn't right. The deputy walked back toward Richard. The county officials followed. So did I. The entire atmosphere had changed. Nobody was talking about road improvements anymore. Now everyone was talking about ownership. Access. Permits. Documents. Things that suddenly mattered a lot more. Richard spotted the officials approaching. His expression changed instantly. For the first time all day, he looked nervous. Not angry. Nervous. The older official asked him several questions. Simple questions. Direct questions. Where did the access authorization originate? Who prepared the submitted surveys? When were ownership records verified? Richard answered quickly. Too quickly. Like someone trying to stay ahead of a problem. The official kept listening. Kept taking notes. Then he asked for supporting documents. Original copies. Not photocopies. Not summaries. Originals. That request seemed to catch Richard off guard. His answer became less certain. Less polished. The crowd noticed. Everyone noticed. Even the contractors noticed. The foreman stepped farther away. Creating distance. A subtle move. But an important one. The work crews had stopped completely now. No engines. No movement. No construction. Just people waiting. Watching. Trying to understand what was unfolding. Then another man arrived. A local surveyor named David. Most property owners in the county knew him. He had worked on land boundaries for decades. When David saw the maps, he immediately asked to review them. Nobody objected. Several minutes passed. The crowd remained silent. Then David lowered the paperwork. And shook his head. Not dramatically. Just once. Slowly. That reaction alone created a wave of whispers. Because David wasn't the type to overreact. If he looked concerned, people paid attention. The deputy asked him a question. David answered quietly. But several of us were close enough to hear. According to him, one of the survey references didn't match the actual topography of the mountain. Not even close. The route shown on paper couldn't physically exist where it was drawn. The room for error wasn't small. It was significant. The kind of discrepancy professionals usually catch immediately. That changed everything. Now the issue wasn't just ownership. It was accuracy. And accuracy matters when millions of dollars are involved. Richard immediately disagreed. He argued the maps were correct. The surveyor remained calm. Very calm. He simply asked which field team had verified the measurements. No answer came. The silence lasted longer than anyone expected. Long enough for several contractors to exchange worried looks. Long enough for neighbors to start filming with their phones. Long enough for the deputy to start writing more notes. Then another twist arrived. A black SUV climbed the mountain road. Nobody recognized it at first. But Richard did. His face changed the moment he saw it. A man stepped out wearing a business suit. Not exactly common attire on a remote mountain road. The man walked directly toward Richard. Ignoring everyone else. Their conversation was brief. Very brief. But tense. Even from a distance, that much was obvious. The suited man kept glancing toward the county officials. Then toward the crowd. Then back at Richard. Whatever he was saying wasn't good news. A few minutes later, he left. Just turned around and drove away. No explanation. No introduction. Nothing. The strange part. Richard looked even more unsettled after the man left. As if the visit had confirmed his worst fear. The afternoon dragged on. Questions continued. Documents changed hands. Phone calls were made. People arrived and left. Yet no one seemed willing to explain the full situation. Not publicly. Not yet. Then Michael walked over to me. His face was pale. He had been speaking with several property owners lower on the mountain. What he told me added another layer to the story. Apparently some residents had already signed preliminary agreements related to the resort project. Nothing final. But enough to create expectations. Some expected road improvements. Others expected property value increases. A few expected future business opportunities. In other words, people had invested hope into this project. A lot of hope. And now cracks were appearing everywhere. One homeowner was reportedly furious. Another was demanding answers. A third had already contacted an attorney. The mood across the mountain was shifting fast. People who had supported the project were becoming uneasy. People who trusted the HOA leadership were beginning to ask questions. Hard questions. Questions nobody wanted to answer. Around sunset, the county officials finally gathered their paperwork. Most people assumed they were leaving. Instead, they approached the deputy. The conversation lasted nearly 20 minutes. Nobody could hear it. But everyone watched. When it ended, the deputy nodded. Then walked directly to the equipment operators. One by one. Speaking privately with each crew. The reactions varied. Some looked surprised. Others looked relieved. One operator immediately climbed into his machine and began preparing to leave. That caught everyone's attention. Soon another operator did the same. Then another. The contractors were packing up. Fast. Very fast. Richard noticed too. He stormed toward the foreman. The two men argued beside a parked excavator. Neither appeared happy. The foreman eventually pointed toward the deputy. Then toward the county officials. Then simply walked away. That was it. Conversation over. Whatever authority Richard thought he had earlier in the day seemed to be disappearing. Piece by piece. But the biggest surprise came moments later. The deputy approached me again. This time his expression was different. Less cautious. More direct. He asked if I could meet him at the county offices the next morning. Early. Before business hours. I asked why. He hesitated. Then gave an answer that immediately raised more questions. Additional records had surfaced. Records nobody expected to find. Records connected to the mountain pass. And according to him, they were important enough that multiple departments wanted to review them together. Multiple departments. Not just planning. Not just zoning. Multiple departments. That wasn't normal. Not for a simple property dispute. Not even close. The sun had almost disappeared behind the mountains. Contractors were leaving. Neighbors were heading home. County officials packed their vehicles. The crowd slowly dissolved. Yet nobody seemed satisfied. Nobody felt like the story was over. Because it wasn't. Not even close. As I turned to leave, Michael called out from across the road. His voice carried farther than he intended. Everyone nearby heard it. Including Richard. Michael asked one question. A question that instantly froze the entire scene. If those records are real, who actually promised access to the resort? Nobody answered. Not the deputy. Not the county officials. Not Richard. No one. Because for the first time all day, it appeared possible that the person making promises may never have had the authority to make them in the first place. And the documents waiting at the county office might finally reveal why. The next morning started before sunrise. The mountain was still dark when I left the cabin. The broken gate remained exactly where the contractors had left it. Bent steel. Broken hinges. Fresh tire tracks. A reminder of everything that had happened. And everything that still didn't make sense. The county offices were nearly empty when I arrived. Only a few vehicles sat in the parking lot. One of them belonged to the deputy. Another belonged to the surveyor. A third belonged to someone I didn't recognize. That vehicle would become important later. Inside, the atmosphere felt different. Quiet. Focused. Nobody was making small talk. Nobody was smiling. The deputy led me into a conference room. Several people were already waiting. Planning officials. County land records staff. The surveyor. 2 attorneys representing county departments. And stacks of documents. A lot of documents. The binder from the day before was now joined by 3 more. Every chair seemed surrounded by paperwork. The older county official opened the meeting. He went straight to the point. During the previous evening, county staff had located archived records connected to the mountain pass. Records dating back decades. Long before the resort proposal. Long before the HOA. Long before Richard became involved. The room remained silent. Then the official slid a document across the table. The paper looked old. Very old. The edges were worn. The ink had faded. But one thing remained perfectly clear. The route crossing the mountain pass. The route that every development proposal depended on. The route that crossed my property. The official explained that the pass was never transferred. Never dedicated to public use. Never included in any county road system. Never conveyed to any developer. The room became even quieter. One attorney leaned back in his chair. Slowly. Almost like he had expected this. But not everyone had. One of the planning officials looked genuinely stunned. Another immediately started reviewing notes. The surveyor simply nodded. As if pieces were finally falling into place. Then came the first real shock. The county had located multiple submissions connected to the resort project. Different versions. Different dates. Different supporting materials. Not all of them matched. Some showed one access route. Others showed another. One version referenced an easement that apparently didn't exist. Another referenced property descriptions that conflicted with county maps. The discrepancies weren't small anymore. They were becoming impossible to ignore. The attorneys began asking questions. Very specific questions. Who prepared each submission? Who certified them? Who reviewed them? Who approved them? The answers weren't always clear. And that uncertainty was becoming a problem. A major problem. The meeting lasted for hours. Every document seemed to raise new questions. Every answer led somewhere unexpected. Then the mini-twist nobody expected arrived. One of the county clerks entered the room carrying another file box. A box discovered in storage that morning. Inside were records tied to a previous development proposal from nearly 15 years earlier. A proposal that had failed. At first nobody understood why it mattered. Then the surveyor found something. A single map. Folded between dozens of unrelated documents. He opened it carefully. The room leaned forward. And suddenly everything became interesting again. The map showed the same mountain pass. The same route. The same property boundaries. And written across the margin was a note from a consulting firm. A short note. But an important one. The proposed development lacked guaranteed legal access. The proposal had been rejected. 15 years earlier. For the exact issue everyone was discussing now. The room went silent. Not because anyone was surprised. Because nobody could understand how that warning had disappeared. How had the same problem resurfaced years later? How had millions of dollars moved forward despite it? Nobody had a good answer. Around lunchtime the meeting ended. Not because questions were resolved. Because there were too many of them. Outside the building, several property owners had already gathered. Word was spreading. Fast. Michael was there. 2 neighboring landowners were there. Even a few residents from the HOA development had arrived. People wanted answers. Some looked angry. Others looked worried. A few looked betrayed. One homeowner spoke openly about money he had already invested preparing for the resort project. Another said he had purchased land specifically because of promises made during presentations. A third claimed buyers were already backing out of deals. The uncertainty was spreading beyond the mountain. And it was spreading quickly. Then Richard arrived. Nobody expected him. Yet there he was. Walking through the parking lot. Trying to maintain control. Trying to appear confident. But confidence was becoming harder to sell. Not after everything people had learned. Several residents approached him immediately. Questions came from every direction. Hard questions. Direct questions. Questions about access. Questions about permits. Questions about ownership. Questions about the destroyed gate. Richard tried answering. For a while. Then the conversation became heated. Not shouting. Not chaos. Just frustration. Real frustration. Months of promises were colliding with reality. And people could feel it. The deputy eventually stepped between the groups. Not because anyone was out of control. Because emotions were escalating. The tension was obvious. Richard left shortly afterward. But his departure created another surprise. One of the HOA residents approached me after he left. A man named Brian. I had never spoken to him before. He seemed nervous. Very nervous. He kept looking around before speaking. Then he told me something strange. Months earlier, during a private HOA meeting, concerns about access rights had already been raised. Several board members questioned whether the project had secured everything required. According to Brian, those concerns were dismissed. Quickly. Almost aggressively. People were told the issue had been resolved. Completely resolved. No further discussion needed. At the time, most residents accepted that explanation. Now they weren't so sure. Brian wasn't the only one talking. Others began sharing stories too. Small details. Tiny inconsistencies. Things that seemed unimportant months ago, but looked very different now. One resident mentioned maps that changed between meetings. Another recalled presentations where certain parcels were never shown. Someone else remembered questions being redirected whenever the pass came up. Individually, none of it meant much. Together, it painted a troubling picture. By late afternoon, county officials were receiving calls non-stop. Attorneys were involved. Investors were asking questions. Property owners were demanding information. The pressure was building everywhere. Then came another twist. A local newspaper published a short online article. Nothing dramatic. Just a brief report. Construction halted. Access dispute under review. County records being examined. Simple. Accurate. But the effect was immediate. Within hours, the story spread beyond the county. People connected to the resort project started paying attention. People with money. People with contracts. People with deadlines. The mountains suddenly became the center of attention. That evening I returned to the cabin. The road felt different. The mountain felt different. The broken gate was still there. Waiting. Like evidence. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed fresh tire tracks. New tracks. They hadn't been there that morning. Someone had visited while I was gone. I parked. Walked slowly toward the cabin. Nothing appeared damaged. Nothing appeared disturbed. Yet something felt off. Then I found it. A large envelope. Tucked beneath a rock near the porch. No stamp. No address. No return information. Just my name written on the front. I stood there for several seconds. Looking at it. Thinking. Trying to decide whether to open it immediately. Eventually I did. Inside was a single document. 1 page. Photocopied. No explanation attached. No note. No signature. Nothing. At first the page meant very little. Then I saw a highlighted section. And my stomach dropped. The document appeared to show an internal project estimate. A financial estimate. And right in the middle was a number. $20 million. Not the value of the resort. Not construction costs. Not projected revenue. The estimated value assigned specifically to permanent access through the mountain pass. My pass. The one crossing my property. The one nobody supposedly needed permission to use. I stared at the page. Reading it again. Then again. Trying to understand what I was looking at. Because if the document was genuine, someone had known exactly how important that pass was all along. And someone had been willing to move forward anyway. But the most unsettling part wasn't the number. It was the handwritten note scribbled beside it. A note added by someone involved in the project. Just 4 words. 4 simple words. And they changed everything. Owner not informed yet. I looked back toward the dark road. Toward the mountain. toward the broken gate. And for the first time, I realized the destruction of my property may never have been a mistake at all. The next morning, I handed the document to the deputy. He read it twice. Then a third time. His expression never changed. But he immediately made a copy. That told me enough. The document mattered. A lot. Within hours, county officials were reviewing it alongside everything else. The surveys. The access records. The development filings. The meeting notes. The growing stack of contradictions. By then, the story had spread throughout the county. Everyone seemed to know about the destroyed gate. Everyone seemed to know about the access dispute. What nobody knew was how much damage was still coming. 3 days later, the first major consequence arrived. The resort application was formally suspended. Not denied. Not approved. Suspended. Every review process stopped. Every deadline froze. Every agency involved paused its work. For investors, that was a disaster. For contractors, it was worse. For the HOA leadership, it was becoming impossible to explain. The reaction was immediate. Property owners flooded board meetings. Attendance doubled. Then tripled. Men who rarely spoke at community meetings suddenly had plenty to say. Questions came non-stop. Who approved the project? Who verified access? Who reviewed ownership records? Who authorized construction activity on private property? Some questions received answers. Most did not. The frustration kept growing. Meanwhile, county attorneys continued digging. The deeper they looked, the stranger things became. Not criminal. Not dramatic. Just messy. Very messy. Documents that should have matched didn't match. Assumptions had apparently become facts. Claims had apparently become accepted without verification. And somewhere along the way, people stopped asking difficult questions. That mistake was now costing everyone. A week later, another meeting took place. This one involved county officials, property owners, and representatives connected to the development. The room was packed. Not a single seat remained empty. Even people standing along the walls stayed until the end. Nobody wanted to miss what happened next. Richard attended. So did several HOA board members. For the first time, they weren't presenting plans. They weren't promoting growth. They weren't discussing opportunities. They were answering questions. Or trying to. The county surveyor spoke first. He explained the access issue carefully. Methodically. Without assigning blame. Without making accusations. Just facts. The mountain pass crossed private property. The route had never been transferred. The access rights being assumed by the project could not be verified. Simple. Direct. Clear. The room became silent. Then one investor stood up. A local businessman. Well respected. Not known for causing trouble. His question hit harder than anything else that day. He asked how millions of dollars in planning had moved forward without certainty regarding legal access. Nobody answered immediately. Because nobody could. The answer wasn't simple. Several people had relied on information from others. Several assumptions had never been challenged. Several warnings had apparently been ignored. And now everyone was paying the price. Richard finally spoke. For the first time since the gate was destroyed, he sounded tired. Not confident. Not polished. Just tired. He claimed he believed the access issue had already been resolved. He said consultants assured him everything was in order. He said the project team relied on information they thought was accurate. Some people accepted that explanation. Others didn't. The room remained divided. Then came another twist. One of the county attorneys revealed something unexpected. Several months before construction planning began, written concerns regarding access rights had been submitted during an internal review. The concerns existed. On record. In writing. The room shifted instantly. People looked at one another. Some shook their heads. Others stared at the floor. The attorney wasn't accusing anyone. He simply confirmed the concerns had existed. And had been documented. That changed the conversation. Because now nobody could claim the issue appeared out of nowhere. Warnings had been present. Maybe not understood fully. Maybe not taken seriously. But present. After that meeting, support for the project began collapsing. Investors grew cautious. Contractors backed away. Consultants became difficult to reach. The momentum that had taken years to build disappeared in weeks. One by one. Deal by deal. Meeting by meeting. Then came the financial consequences. Several planned agreements expired. Financing deadlines passed. Partnership negotiations stalled. Potential buyers moved elsewhere. The numbers added up quickly. Very quickly. Eventually, local business publications estimated the failed development opportunity represented nearly $20 million in lost project value. Not because the resort was worth $20 million. Because access through the mountain pass had been central to everything. Without that route, the entire proposal changed. Without that route, costs increased dramatically. Without that route, investors lost confidence. Without that route, the project simply stopped making sense. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The same gate they called an obstruction had been protecting the most valuable piece of the entire project. Months passed. The mountain gradually returned to normal. Construction equipment disappeared. Survey markers vanished. The rumors faded. The crowd stopped gathering. Life became quiet again. But not everything returned to normal. Several HOA board positions changed hands. Residents demanded more transparency. Meeting attendance remained higher than before. People paid closer attention. Asked harder questions. Read documents more carefully. Trust, once damaged, takes time to rebuild. As for Richard, he eventually stepped away from HOA leadership. Not because of a court order. Not because of a scandal. Because the confidence people once placed in him had disappeared. The project became attached to his name. And every discussion eventually led back to the same issue. The access nobody actually controlled. One afternoon, nearly a year after everything happened, Michael stopped by the cabin. We stood near the rebuilt gate. Looking down the road. Talking about how quickly things had unraveled. He laughed when he pointed toward the mountain pass. Then he said something I still remember. All those people spent years focusing on the resort. Nobody bothered to focus on the road. That was the lesson. Not just for developers. Not just for HOAs. For everyone. Big projects often depend on small details. Ignore those details long enough, and eventually they become the entire story. The new gate stands there today. Stronger than the old one. The pass remains exactly where it has always been. The mountain remains quiet. And every time I drive through that entrance, I remember the morning I stepped onto the porch and found excavators tearing it apart. They thought they were removing an obstacle. What they were really doing was exposing a problem nobody wanted to acknowledge. A problem worth $20 million. And by the time everyone finally understood it, the damage had already been done. If you enjoy stories about real property disputes, HOA conflicts, and the unexpected consequences that follow, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next one.